We live in an era where the entirety of human knowledge is accessible in seconds, yet this access is coinciding with a rapid retreat into passive acceptance and echo chambers. Philosophers and sociologists are observing a phenomenon known as collective stupidity. Large masses of people are adopting shallow thinking, blindly accepting narratives, and surrendering their intellectual independence without even realizing it. This chart illustrates the core of the crisis. It shows the volume of information the average human processes daily. Compared to just a few decades ago, we are now attempting to process 5 times as much data every single day. Our biological minds were not built for this constant barrage of notifications and updates, causing the brain to take cognitive shortcuts. Decades ago, philosopher Noam Chomsky analyzed how power structures rely on the manufacturing of consent. When people are trained to consume without questioning and agree without understanding, they become easy to manage. Losing the capacity to reason critically strips a population of its intellectual autonomy. When a society stops asking whether a narrative is actually true, it becomes entirely vulnerable to systemic manipulation. This decline in reasoning begins in childhood, long before we encounter a social media feed. The award-winning educator John Kaler Gatto argued that modern compulsory schooling was designed during the industrial age. The goal was to prepare children for predictable, obedient, and non-disruptive factory life. The remnants of that industrial model are still embedded in classrooms today. Children are evaluated on their ability to memorize and regurgitate information. Conformity is rewarded with high marks, while curiosity is often treated as a distraction. Over years of this routine, a psychological pattern takes root. We learn to follow the rules, stay quiet, and understand that questioning the consensus carries a social penalty. In adult life, the technological mediums we interact with daily take this early conditioning and accelerate it. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf has detailed how scrolling digital media physically rewires the brain. The constant jumping between tabs and skimming short texts fractures our attention span, diminishing our biological capacity to sustain focus and engage in deep reading. In the 1960s, philosopher Marshall McLuhan warned that the medium is the message. The way we receive information dictates the way we think about it. Today's dominant platforms are programmed to capture attention through speed and emotional response. Algorithms reward outrage and tribal consensus, burying thoughtful, nuanced reasoning under an avalanche of rapid-fire reactions. In this environment, the merit of an idea is no longer judged by evidence or logic. When virality and sheer volume supersede facts, truth is subjected to a cognitive tyranny of the majority. External platforms only manipulate us because they target a vulnerability built directly into our biology. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman mapped this vulnerability when he detailed the brain's 2 operating systems, one fast and instinctive, the other slow and analytical. This diagram breaks down how the modern environment exploits those systems. Our high-speed, always-on culture overwhelms the brain's processing capacity, forcing it to abandon the slow, deliberate pathways. Instead, we become trapped in the fast, instinctive mode, relying on rapid mental shortcuts. Operating continuously in this fast state triggers confirmation bias. Once the brain accepts a familiar narrative, it defends that belief to conserve energy, actively deflecting contradictory evidence regardless of how factual it might be. Social psychologist Irving Janis documented how this scales up into groupthink. The biological drive for social harmony forces otherwise intelligent people to silence their own doubts and choose group consensus over objective truth. The disappearance of critical thinking stems from the successful, systematic exploitation of our deepest neurological survival mechanisms, rather than a failure of raw intelligence. Beneath the algorithms and the educational models lies a deeply uncomfortable emotional reality. We avoid critical thinking because we are terrified of what it might reveal about the identities we cling to. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, to avoid confronting the unconscious motives and cognitive dissonance within their own minds.
Evolving intellectually requires breaking the illusion that you are your ideas. You must endure the painful process of detaching your personal worth from inherited political or tribal beliefs. The psychologist Erich Fromm noted that true freedom demands immense personal responsibility. Because that responsibility is terrifying, many find it easier to surrender their autonomy and take comfort in the anonymity of the crowd. Critical thinking is a courageous spiritual act that prioritizes truth and growth over comfort and approval. It represents the quiet decision to live with your eyes open, even when the light burns. Breaking this conditioning requires deliberate, daily practice. The first step is cultivating metacognition, actively observing what media you consume and questioning whether your response is an independent thought or a programmed reaction. Next is building the mental strength for dialectical thinking. This is the capacity to hold two opposing, contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time, exploring them deeply without rushing to pick a side. This process demands absolute intellectual humility. Socrates claimed his only wisdom was knowing he knew nothing, an admission that builds the foundation for genuine curiosity. Looking at history, every major leap in human progress has come from individuals who dared to step outside the consensus. They were the ones willing to face rejection and challenge the collective ignorance of their time. In a society overwhelmed by noise and conformity, the quiet act of pausing to reflect is a profound rebellion. Reclaiming your ability to think clearly is how you step out of the crowd and become the architect of your own mind.